My name is Angela Carter, and I'm 42 years old. If there is one thing I've always carried with me, through every storm and every small victory of my life, it's the rhythm of a sewing machine and the sound of fabric sliding between my fingers. Sewing has been more than a hobby. It's been my anchor. My mother taught me when I was a girl in Atlanta, sitting on a wooden stool in her small living room. She used to say, "If you know how to sew, you'll never feel powerless. You can always create something out of nothing." Those words stayed with me, stitched into every hem, every seam, every dream I've ever had. I don't have a glamorous life. I work as a receptionist at a dental clinic here in Baltimore, smile politely at patients who often don't even remember my name, and go home to a modest apartment that smells faintly of lavender detergent. But sewing makes me feel alive. When my hands are busy with a piece of fabric, cutting, pinning, stitching, I feel like I'm adding beauty to a world that often forgets me. So when my son Michael called to tell me about the big family celebration his wife's parents were hosting, I immediately thought of making something special for the occasion. Michael is my only child, the one I raised mostly on my own after his father left when he was 10. He's 30 now, married for 3 years to a woman named Vanessa. She's smart, well-educated, and, if I'm honest, often a little too polished for me. She comes from a wealthy family, the kind who host dinners in big suburban houses where everything looks like it came out of a catalog. The celebration was going to be a big deal. Vanessa's parents were celebrating their wedding anniversary, and there would be dozens of people from both sides of the family. For me, it wasn't just another gathering. It was a chance to step into that space, into their world, with confidence. I wanted Michael to feel proud of me, and I wanted Vanessa's family to see me as more than just the woman from the other side of town. That's why I spent weeks designing my dress. I chose a deep emerald green satin, the kind that shimmers when the light hits it. The neckline was elegant but modest, the sleeves long with a slight flare at the wrist, and the skirt fell just below the knee with a graceful sway. It wasn't flashy. It was timeless. Every night after work, I sat at my sewing table, the hum of my old Singer machine filling my apartment like a heartbeat. Each stitch was a prayer, for respect, for dignity, for a moment when I wouldn't feel invisible. When the day finally arrived, I woke up early, pressed my dress carefully, and did my makeup with a steady hand. I don't wear much makeup usually, but that day I allowed myself a bit more. A red lipstick that made me feel bold, a touch of eyeliner to make my eyes stand out. I slipped into the dress, zipped it up slowly, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had survived so much but was still standing tall. I took the bus to the suburbs, the emerald fabric folded neatly under my coat to protect it from the autumn chill. When I reached the house, I stood outside for a moment, staring at the 2-story colonial with its white pillars and manicured lawn. My heart was pounding. I whispered to myself, "You belong here, Angela. Don't shrink yourself." The door opened before I even knocked. Michael stood there, smiling, his arms wide. "Mom, you look incredible," he said, pulling me into a hug. Hearing that from him was worth every late night at the sewing table. But then, as I stepped into the brightly lit living room, I froze. There she was, Vanessa, standing by the fireplace, holding a glass of wine, laughing with her cousins. And she was wearing my dress, the exact same one. Same emerald green, same neckline, same sleeves, same hem. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but no, it was real. She turned, her laughter fading when she saw me. Her smile stiffened, her eyes widening just slightly, as though she hadn't expected me to show up in what she thought was her unique outfit. The room seemed to quiet, or maybe it was just in my head. I could feel the stares, the whispers forming at the corners of the crowd. "Angela," Vanessa said finally, her voice light but tight. "What a coincidence." I forced a smile, though my stomach dropped. "Yes, quite the coincidence," I replied, my tone calm, though inside I was burning. Michael looked between us, confused. "Wait, you two have the same dress?" he asked, almost laughing, as if it were some quirky accident. But it wasn't funny. Not to me. I knew every inch of that dress because I had made it with my own hands. It wasn't something you could just buy off a rack. As the evening went on, I tried to hold myself together. I smiled when people spoke to me, complimented the food, and even joined in on small conversations. But every time I caught sight of Vanessa, a knot tightened in my chest. The way people compared us with their eyes, the way Vanessa seemed determined to move through the room with exaggerated grace, as if she were the one truly meant to wear it. It cut me deeply. At one point, I overheard one of her relatives whisper, "Oh dear, how embarrassing. Imagine showing up in the same dress as your mother-in-law." Another chuckled softly. She should have known better. I knew they were talking about me. The humiliation pressed against me like a weight, but I swallowed it down, unwilling to let them see me break. Later, as I stood by the buffet table pretending to be interested in the cheese platter, Vanessa approached me. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes carried something else. Something sharp. "It's a beautiful dress," she said, sipping her wine. "Where did you get it?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I didn't get it," I said quietly. "I made it." Her smile faltered just for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, well, what are the odds?" she replied smoothly, before gliding away. But in that brief flicker, I saw it. She knew. Somehow she had seen my design, maybe through Michael, maybe by accident, maybe even on purpose. However it happened, she had taken it and claimed it as her own. That night, I went home feeling smaller than I had in years. The dress that had once made me feel powerful now felt like a costume of shame. I hung it back in my closet, sat on the edge of my bed, and let the tears I'd been holding back finally fall. But as the tears dried, something inside me hardened. I thought of my mother, of her words about never being powerless as long as I could create, and I realized Vanessa might have humiliated me, but she hadn't taken away what truly mattered. My hands, my skill, my dignity, those were mine, and I wasn't going to let this be the end of the story. The morning after the party, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest. My dress still hung on the closet door, the emerald satin catching a sliver of light from the window. I couldn't look at it without feeling the sting of shame, as if every stitch mocked me. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring into the steam. I replayed the night over and over. The whispers, Vanessa's smile, the way people looked at me as though I had done something wrong. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a coincidence. That dress wasn't some random overlap of taste. It was mine. I remembered something from 2 weeks earlier. Michael had come by, dropping off some paperwork he needed help with. While he was waiting for me to finish, he'd wandered into my sewing room. "Wow, Mom, that's looking amazing," he had said, running his hand lightly over the half-finished emerald dress laid out on the mannequin. Vanessa wasn't with him, but I wondered if he'd mentioned it to her, maybe even described it in detail. I clenched my mug tighter. Maybe it wasn't intentional. Maybe it was just bad luck. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa had known exactly what she was doing. By afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message. It was Michael. "Hey, Mom. Thanks for coming last night. Everyone said you looked beautiful. Sorry about the dress thing. That was kind of funny, huh?" Funny. That word cut deeper than he realized. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted again. Finally, I just wrote, "I'm glad I came. We'll talk soon." Later that week, I went back to the dental clinic, where the monotony of answering phones and filing insurance claims usually kept me numb, but I couldn't stop thinking about that night. The humiliation wasn't fading. It was growing. Every time I picked up the phone, I wondered if the person on the other end would laugh at me the way Vanessa's relatives had. On Wednesday during lunch, I called my best friend, Denise. We've known each other since high school, and she's the one person I can speak to without pretending. "You're telling me she wore your dress?" Denise's voice was sharp, full of disbelief. "Yes," I said softly. "The same fabric, the same design, everything." "That girl has some nerve," Denise snapped. "Angela, she didn't just wear it by chance. She saw it or she heard about it, and she copied it. That's disrespect, plain and simple." Hearing Denise say it out loud made my stomach twist, but it also gave me a strange comfort. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. "So what do?" I asked. "You hold your head up," Denise said firmly. "You don't let her win. If she wanted to humiliate you, don't give her that satisfaction." Make something else. Make it even better. And show up next time like the queen you are." Her words lit something inside me. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of determination. That weekend, I pulled out my sketchbook. I drew late into the night, flipping through old magazines for inspiration, letting my pencil move until the lines began to form a new design, bolder, more daring. This one would be crimson red, with a fitted bodice and an asymmetrical hemline. It wasn't just a dress, it was a statement. But as I worked, the anger inside me simmered. I couldn't stop asking myself why. Why would Vanessa do this? What had I ever done to her? I had always tried to be polite, to respect her place in Michael's life. I hadn't interfered in their marriage, hadn't judged her choices. So why target me? A week later, I got my answer, or at least part of it. Michael called and invited me to dinner at their house. "Vanessa wants to apologize," he said. The words made me pause. Apologize? I agreed, though my chest tightened with anxiety. That Friday evening, I arrived at their home. Vanessa greeted me at the door, her smile a little too polished, her eyes unreadable. "Angela, thank you for coming," she said softly. "I wanted to clear the air." We sat at the dining table, a bottle of wine open between us. Michael tried to ease the tension with small talk, but I could feel the weight of what was unsaid hanging in the room. Finally, Vanessa took a sip of wine and looked at me. "About the dress. I can see how that must have felt uncomfortable for you." "Uncomfortable?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," she said quickly, "but it truly was a coincidence. I saw a similar design online and had it custom made. I had no idea you were making the same thing." I studied her face carefully. She was calm, smooth, like someone reading from a prepared script. But my gut told me she was lying. "I made that dress myself," I said quietly. "From scratch. And it wasn't from any website." Vanessa's smile didn't falter. "Well, then I suppose it was just one of those strange coincidences." Michael looked between us, uneasy. "See? It was just bad luck. No harm done. But harm was done. Not just to me, but to my place in their world." I forced a smile, not wanting to create a scene. "Of course," I said. Strange coincidence indeed, but inside, I was boiling. When I left their house that night, I knew two things for certain. Vanessa wasn't innocent, and Michael was blind to it. If I wanted respect, I would have to take it, not wait for it to be handed to me. Over the next month, I poured every ounce of my energy into the red dress. The sewing machine hummed day and night, the fabric sliding under my fingers like fire. This time, I wasn't just making a dress, I was reclaiming my voice. When I finally finished, I stood before the mirror once again. The crimson fabric hugged my figure, the hem swayed like flame with every movement. I felt powerful, unapologetic, and I knew this wasn't just about a dress anymore. It was about drawing a line, about no longer shrinking myself to fit into spaces where I was only tolerated. The next family event was coming soon, Thanksgiving dinner at Vanessa's parents' house. And this time, I wasn't walking in quietly. This time, I was walking in to be seen. Thanksgiving came faster than I expected. The chill in the Baltimore air had sharpened, and the trees on my street were almost bare, their branches stretching like tired arms against the gray sky. Normally, I loved this holiday. Cooking sweet potato pie, listening to old soul records, watching parades on TV, but this year felt different. I wasn't just preparing food, I was preparing myself. The crimson dress hung on the closet door, waiting for its moment. Every time I glanced at it, I felt a mix of nerves and resolve. I wasn't walking into that house to blend in. I was walking in to remind them, and myself, that I belonged in any room I stepped into. On the morning of Thanksgiving, I pressed the dress carefully, packed a small dish of collard greens I had cooked the night before, and took the bus across town. My heart thudded with every stop we passed. People around me chatted or stared out windows, unaware of the war I was fighting inside. When I arrived at Vanessa's parents' house, the driveway was already full of cars. The front yard was decorated with pumpkins and corn husks, the kind of picture-perfect scene that belonged on a postcard. I stood at the door for a moment, clutching my casserole dish, whispering the same words I had told myself weeks earlier. "You belong here, Angela. Don't shrink yourself." The door opened, and Vanessa's mother, Lorraine, greeted me with her polished smile. "Angela, so glad you could come," she said, kissing me lightly on the cheek. "Thank you for having me," I replied, stepping inside. The house was warm and filled with the aroma of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and cloves. Relatives gathered in the living room, laughing and sipping wine, while children ran through the hallway with toy cars and plastic swords. It was chaos. But it was the kind of chaos that made a house feel alive. I slipped off my coat, revealing the crimson dress. Heads turned. For a moment, the room seemed to pause. The fabric shimmered in the light, the asymmetrical hem flowing as I moved. I held my head high, refusing to show the nerves bubbling inside. Michael spotted me first. "Wow, Mom," he said, his eyes widening. "That's stunning." His words filled me with quiet pride. But then I saw Vanessa, standing by the dining table, a glass of wine in her hand. She froze when she noticed me, her eyes flicking over the dress. Her smile tightened, almost imperceptibly, but enough for me to see it. "Angela," she said smoothly, walking toward me. "You look festive." "Thank you," I replied, my voice calm but firm. The evening unfolded with the usual rituals: family gossip, clinking glasses, children sneaking cookies before dessert. I tried to enjoy the food, the laughter, the warmth of the house. But beneath it all, tension lingered, an invisible thread tugging at me and Vanessa every time our eyes met. At one point, I overheard two of Vanessa's cousins whispering in the corner. "Did you see her dress?" One murmured. "Much better than the last one." The other chuckled softly. "Careful, don't let Vanessa hear you say that." Their words were like a quiet victory, though I pretended not to notice. Dinner was served at a long table covered with a white cloth and decorated with golden candles. Lorraine gave a short speech about gratitude, then everyone dug in. The turkey was tender, the cranberry sauce tart, the sweet potatoes creamy with marshmallows on top. I passed plates, exchanged polite small talk, and laughed at Michael's stories. But then Vanessa decided to speak. "So," she said, her voice just loud enough for the table to hear. "Angela, that's quite a dress. Did you make it yourself again?" The way she said "again" carried weight, a deliberate reminder of the humiliation at the anniversary party. A few heads turned toward me, curious. I set down my fork slowly, looked her in the eye, and smiled. "Yes, I did. Every stitch. And I'm proud of it." Her smile faltered, just slightly. "Well," she said lightly, "you certainly have a talent." Lorraine interjected quickly, perhaps sensing the undercurrent. "It's beautiful, Angela. Truly. You should consider selling your designs." The table murmured in agreement, and I felt a warmth spread through me. For once, I wasn't invisible. People were seeing me, not just as Michael's mother, not as the woman from a different world, but as someone with something to offer. Vanessa raised her glass, masking whatever she felt with another polished smile, but I caught the flicker in her eyes. She wasn't used to being overshadowed. After dinner, while others gathered in the living room for pie and coffee, I stepped outside for air. The cold bit at my skin, but I needed a moment to breathe. I leaned against the porch railing, staring at the dark sky. A voice interrupted my thoughts. "You really shook her tonight." I turned. It was Denise's cousin, Lila, who had married into the family years ago. We'd spoken briefly before, but we weren't close. "Excuse me," I asked cautiously. Lila smiled knowingly. "Vanessa, she didn't expect you to come in looking like that." I could see it all over her face. I shook my head. "I'm not trying to compete with her." "Maybe not," Lila said, "but she's been competing with you since day one." Her words made me pause. "What do you mean?" Lila shrugged. "Vanessa's always had this need to prove herself. Perfect wife, perfect daughter, perfect everything. And when you walked in with that green dress, whether she copied it or not, it wasn't about the fabric. It was about making sure she was the one shining, not you." I stayed quiet, letting her words sink in. "Don't let her dim you," Lila added softly. "You've got your own light." That night, as I rode the bus home, her words echoed in my mind. Maybe this wasn't just about a dress. Maybe it was about something deeper. About respect. About space. About identity. I looked out the window at the passing city lights and realized something. For too long, I had let myself be small in Michael's new world. I had smiled politely, stayed quiet, tried not to cause waves, but shrinking hadn't earned me respect. It had only made me invisible. The red dress was only the beginning. I didn't know exactly what the next step would be, but I knew this. I wasn't going to let humiliation define me. Not anymore. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I went back to work at the clinic. My red dress folded carefully back into the closet. The world around me seemed unchanged. Patients still walked in complaining about toothaches. The phones kept ringing, and the same fluorescent lights buzzed above my desk. Yet inside me, something had shifted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for existing. I had walked into Vanessa's family home, into their perfectly curated world, and I had been seen. People had praised my work, my craft, my identity. That meant more than any polite smile ever could. But the more I replayed the evening, the clearer it became. This wasn't over. Vanessa hadn't expected me to stand tall, and I could see it unsettled her. Part of me felt guilty for feeling satisfaction in that. But another part of me whispered, "You've earned this." That week, Denise invited me over for coffee. She lived in a small townhouse not far from me, and walking into her home always felt like stepping into a safe haven. She had the radio playing softly, and the smell of cinnamon rolls filled the kitchen. "So," she said, handing me a mug, "how was Thanksgiving?" I laughed softly. "Let's just say the red dress did its job." Denise raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" People noticed. Even Lorraine said I should consider selling my designs. Denise leaned forward, excitement flickering in her eyes. "Angela, I've been telling you that for years. You've got real talent. Why not turn it into something more?" I hesitated, stirring my coffee slowly. It's one thing to make dresses for myself. Running a business? That's different. Different doesn't mean impossible. Denise replied firmly. "Look at what you've already done. Imagine if more people could wear your creations. You deserve that." Her words stayed with me long after I left her house. That night, I sat in my sewing room, staring at rolls of fabric stacked against the wall. For years I had seen this room as my private sanctuary. But what if it could be more? What if it could be the start of something bigger? The thought both thrilled and terrified me. Meanwhile, things with Vanessa remained tense. Michael called often, but our conversations were shallow. He didn't mention the dresses, didn't ask about Thanksgiving beyond the usual, "Thanks for coming." It was as if he wanted to pretend everything was normal. But Vanessa wasn't pretending. A week later, she called me herself. "Angela," she began, her voice cool but polite. "I wanted to talk." "Of course," I replied cautiously. "I know things have felt strained. I don't want tension between us." I waited, sensing there was more. She sighed softly. "It's just that sometimes it feels like you're competing with me." I blinked, stunned. "Competing?" "Vanessa, I don't see it that way." "Well," she continued quickly, "when you showed up at Thanksgiving in that red dress, it was beautiful, don't get me wrong, but people kept comparing us. That's not healthy for the family." I took a slow breath, steadying my voice. "Vanessa, I don't compete with you. I make dresses because it's who I am. If people see that and appreciate it, that's not about competition. It's about me finally being seen." There was silence on the line for a moment. Then she said, "I just don't want Michael caught in the middle." "Neither do I," I replied softly. "But respect goes both ways." She didn't respond to that. Instead, she ended the call with a polite, "Well, thank you for listening." Afterward, I sat on my couch, my phone still in my hand, my heart racing. Competing with her? That wasn't my goal. But maybe that's how she saw it. Me stepping into spaces where she expected me to remain small. And maybe that was exactly the problem. The following Saturday, Denise convinced me to go with her to a local crafts fair. The community center was buzzing with booths filled with handmade jewelry, candles, quilts, and baked goods. As we wandered through the aisles, I couldn't stop imagining one of those booths filled with my dresses. "You see this?" Denise whispered, gesturing to a stall selling simple scarves. "If people will buy scarves for $30, imagine what they'd pay for a custom Angela Carter dress." I laughed nervously. "You really think people would buy them?" "Angela," she said firmly, "they already admire your work. You just have to let them." That night, I pulled out a notebook and began sketching. Not just designs, but plans. what fabrics I'd need, how I could price my work, even a name for the collection. Carter by hand. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building something for myself. Not just surviving, but as I leaned into this new dream, tension with Vanessa grew sharper. She began making small comments at family gatherings, subtle but pointed. "Oh, Angela, you really do love attention, don't you?" she said once, when someone complimented another one of my dresses. Another time, when Michael bragged about my talent to a cousin, she cut in with, "Yes, well, anyone can sew if they have the time." Each remark was like a pinprick, small but painful. And yet, I refused to let her see me flinch. Then came the turning point. Lorraine called me one afternoon. "Angela, I've been thinking," she said warmly. "We're hosting a charity gala in February. Would you consider making a dress for me to wear? Something unique?" For a moment, I was speechless. "You want me to design your gown?" "Yes," she said. "You have an incredible gift. I'd be honored to wear your work." Tears welled in my eyes as I thanked her. When I hung up, I sat in my sewing room, overwhelmed. This wasn't just about dresses anymore. This was about recognition. About finally stepping out of the shadows. Of course, when Vanessa found out, she wasn't pleased. At the next family dinner, she made a pointed remark. "Mother, are you sure that's wise? A charity gala is a big event. Maybe it's better to stick with a professional designer." Lorraine simply smiled. "Angela is a professional in her own right. I trust her completely." The look on Vanessa's face was unmistakable. Controlled on the surface, but her eyes burning with frustration. That night, as I walked home, I realized I was no longer just reacting to humiliation. I was rewriting my story. Vanessa had tried to reduce me to an afterthought, but instead, she had pushed me into becoming more. And the next chapter of my life was only just beginning. The weeks leading up to Lorraine's gala were some of the most intense of my life. Every spare moment outside of work was spent in my sewing room, surrounded by sketches, fabric swatches, and spools of thread. I wanted this gown to be perfect. Not just for Lorraine, but for me. This was my chance to prove that my craft wasn't a hobby. It was my art, my legacy. Lorraine had asked for something elegant, something that would turn heads without being gaudy. I chose a midnight blue silk, heavy but fluid, the kind of fabric that carried its own presence. The design was classic with a twist. A fitted bodice that flowed into a floor-length skirt, with a subtle slit that offered movement and grace. Around the neckline, I hand-stitched delicate beadwork, tiny pearls and crystals that shimmered like stars against the dark fabric. Every stitch felt like a statement. Every bead, a piece of me saying, "I am here. I matter." But as the gown took shape, I could feel the pressure mounting. Vanessa's presence lingered like a shadow. She hadn't spoken to me directly since the family dinner, but I could sense her disapproval. Michael called often, his tone cheerful, but I noticed he avoided mentioning his wife when he asked how I was doing. It was as if he were caught between two worlds, and I didn't want to force him to choose. One evening, after a long day at the clinic, I came home to find a voicemail from Lorraine. "Angela, I just wanted to say how excited I am about the gown. I've told some of my friends about it, and they're eager to see it. Who knows? Maybe this could open doors for you." I played that message 3 times, my heart swelling with both pride and fear. Doors opening meant possibilities, but also more scrutiny, more opportunities for someone like Vanessa to try to tear me down. Denise came over the following weekend, bringing a bottle of wine and her usual blunt wisdom. She watched as I worked, her eyes wide. "Girl," she said, shaking her head, "this isn't just a dress. This is art. Do you realize what you're doing?" I smiled faintly. "Just trying to do right by Lorraine." "No," Denise said firmly. "You're building something for yourself. Stop hiding behind humility. Own it." Her words pierced me, because deep down, I knew she was right. For too long, I'd been apologizing for taking up space. This gown was my declaration that I deserved that space. A few days later, Michael called. "Hey, Mom, Vanessa and I were talking. She's a little nervous about this whole gala thing." I kept my voice steady. "Why is she nervous?" "Well, she thinks maybe it puts too much pressure on you. That if something goes wrong, it could reflect badly." I felt my jaw tighten. Michael, I appreciate your concern, but this isn't Vanessa's decision, Lorraine asked me, and I gave her my word. I won't let her down. There was silence on the line. Then Michael sighed. I know. I want everyone to get along. So do I said softly. But respect has to flow both ways. The night of the fitting finally arrived. Lorraine came to my apartment, her chauffeur waiting outside. I had cleared my living room, turning it into a makeshift fitting space. When she stepped into the gown, the room seemed to light up. The midnight blue silk hugged her frame perfectly, the beadwork catching the light in tiny bursts of sparkle. Lorraine turned to the mirror, her eyes widening. Angela, this is breathtaking. Tears filled my eyes as I adjusted the hem. Do you really like it? Like it? She said, her voice firm. I love it. You have a gift. Truly. At that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Validated, recognized, worthy, but not everyone shared that sentiment. The following Sunday, I went to Michael and Vanessa's for dinner. I hadn't planned on discussing the gown, but Lorraine had clearly told them about the fitting. So, Vanessa said as we sat down, her tone casual but sharp around the edges. Mother says you've outdone yourself. She's practically glowing about that gown. I forced a polite smile. I'm glad she's happy with it. Vanessa's fork scraped against her plate. I just hope everything goes smoothly. Galas are high-profile events. One wrong stitch, one loose seam. She trailed off, leaving the words hanging like a threat. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa? No, it's fine, I interrupted, keeping my tone calm. I understand the importance. That's why I put my heart into every detail. Vanessa met my gaze, her smile tight. Well, I suppose we'll see. Dinner carried on with strained politeness, but I left their house with my resolve stronger than ever. I wasn't going to let her shake me. The day of the gala arrived crisp and cold, the kind of winter night where the air felt sharp in your lungs. I stood in my apartment, watching Lorraine's car pull up. When she stepped out at the venue hours later, wearing my gown, the cameras flashed. People turned their heads, whispered, pointed. She carried herself like royalty, and in that moment, I knew. I had created something unforgettable. Inside the ballroom, the chandeliers glowed, the music swelled, and the crowd buzzed with admiration. I wasn't there as a guest, but Lorraine insisted on introducing me to people. This is Angela Carter, she said proudly. The woman behind my gown. Hands shook mine. Compliments poured in. You should open a boutique. Do you take commissions? This is couture-level work. For the first time, I felt seen. Not as Michael's mother, not as Vanessa's in-law, but as Angela, the designer, the creator. But even in that golden moment, I caught sight of Vanessa across the room. She was standing beside Michael, her smile fixed, her eyes cold as they followed me. It was clear. This wasn't just about dresses anymore. This was about power, about identity, about who got to shine in the spotlight. And for once, I wasn't afraid of the fight. The days following the gala were a whirlwind I hadn't anticipated. My phone rang constantly. Calls from people who had seen Lorraine in the gown and wanted something made for themselves. Messages flooded my email inbox. People asking if I took orders, if I had a website, if I could make gowns for weddings, for parties, even for photo shoots. I didn't have a business yet. Not really. Just a sewing machine, fabric stacked in my apartment, and a heart full of determination. But suddenly, what had always been a private passion was becoming something bigger. Denise was the first to push me. Angela, this is your moment, she said over the phone. You've got to ride this wave. Don't wait for someone else to give you permission. I laughed nervously. I don't even know where to start. Start where you are, she said. Post your work online. Share what you've done. People are already looking for you. So I did. That weekend, I created a simple Instagram page, Carter by hand. I uploaded photos of Lorraine in the gown with her permission, along with pictures of some of my other dresses I'd made over the years. I didn't expect much. But within days, the account gained hundreds of followers. Comments poured in. Praise, inquiries, encouragement. I felt a rush of excitement, but also fear. This wasn't just me in my little apartment anymore. This was public, and the more visible I became, the more I knew Vanessa wouldn't like it. Sure enough, at the next family gathering, a casual Sunday dinner at Michael and Vanessa's, tension spilled into the room almost as soon as I walked in. "Angela," Lorraine said warmly, greeting me with a hug. "I can't stop hearing about that gown. People are still talking about it." Michael beamed. "Mom, I saw your Instagram. You're blowing up. But Vanessa?" Vanessa's smile was tight. "Yes," she said smoothly, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Mother's dress was lovely, but let's not exaggerate. One gown doesn't make a fashion empire." The room went quiet for a beat. "I'm not looking for an empire," I replied calmly. "I'm just doing what I love. If people appreciate it, that's a blessing." Vanessa tilted her head. "Of course, I just worry you might be getting carried away. Attention can fade as quickly as it comes." Her words stung, but I held my ground. "That may be true, but while it lasts, I'll keep sewing." Michael shot me an apologetic glance, clearly uncomfortable. Lorraine, on the other hand, looked directly at her daughter and said, "Vanessa, don't dismiss what Angela's doing. It takes courage to put yourself out there." I almost wanted to hug her right there at the table. But Vanessa didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, her comments grew sharper. On social media, she left backhanded compliments under my posts. "Pretty dress, though I wonder how it holds up after a few washes." Or, "Nice work, but have you considered hiring a professional photographer?" It was subtle, just enough to pass as innocent, but I could feel the intention behind every word. One evening, Michael called me. His voice was heavy. "Mom, can you ease up on the sewing stuff for a bit? Vanessa feels like it's becoming a distraction in the family." I swallowed hard. "A distraction? She thinks people are starting to compare you two too much. And she doesn't like how it makes her feel." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Michael," I said finally, my voice steady, "I've spent my whole life putting myself second. If sewing gives me joy, I'm not going to hide it to make Vanessa more comfortable." He sighed. "I knew you'd say that. I don't want this to come between us. It doesn't have to," I whispered, "but I can't disappear again. Not now." After that call, I cried. Not because of Vanessa's bitterness, but because of Michael's blindness. He couldn't, or wouldn't, see that this wasn't about dresses. It was about dignity. Despite the tension, opportunities kept coming. A local boutique reached out, asking if I'd like to display a few pieces in their store. When I walked in and saw my dresses hanging on racks, tags reading Carter by hand, I felt something swell in my chest that I can't describe. Pride, validation, freedom. Denise came with me, snapping pictures on her phone. "Angela Carter," she said, grinning. "You're in a boutique. Look at you." But the higher I climbed, the more Vanessa's resentment seemed to grow. At Christmas dinner, she made a pointed remark in front of the entire family. "Angela," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with sugar, "I saw your dresses in that little shop downtown. It's so cute how they're supporting local hobbies." I met her eyes, my smile polite but firm. "It's not a hobby. It's my work." Lorraine jumped in immediately. "It's more than work. It's art. Angela's creating something special." Vanessa's smile froze, her eyes flashing. For the first time, she didn't have a quick retort. That night, as I rode the bus home, I realized something important. Vanessa might keep trying to belittle me, but the truth was already out there. People saw me. They respected me. And no matter how she tried to twist it, she couldn't erase that. Still, part of me ached. I didn't want to be at war with my daughter-in-law. I didn't want Michael to feel torn, but I also knew I couldn't shrink myself anymore. I had spent too many years swallowing my voice, staying quiet, making myself small. Not anymore. By the end of January, my Instagram had over 2,000 followers. Orders trickled in steadily, and I began saving every dollar I earned in a jar labeled Future Studio. It was a dream that once felt impossible, but now it felt within reach. And yet, in the middle of that joy, a seed of fear remained. Because if there was one thing I'd learned, it was this: Vanessa wasn't done. I could feel it in the way she looked at me, in the sharpness of her words, in the silence that hung heavy whenever I was around her and Michael together. She wasn't going to let me shine without a fight. By February, winter in Baltimore had hardened. The sidewalks were slick with ice, the air sharp enough to sting my cheeks. But inside me, there was a different kind of fire, a momentum I hadn't felt in years. My dresses were no longer just folded neatly in my closet. They were being worn, photographed, admired. I had carved a small but undeniable place for myself, and it was growing. Still, the tension with Vanessa lingered, pressing down like an unspoken weight. I tried to avoid letting it consume me, but every family gathering felt like walking onto a stage where she and I were silently competing for who would be acknowledged, who would be respected. The gala gown had given me visibility, but it had also deepened the cracks. One Saturday, Denise came over with a bag of takeout and her usual no-nonsense energy. She plopped onto my couch and said, "All right, spill. You've been quiet lately, and I know it's not because business is slow." I sighed, setting aside the fabric I'd been pinning. It's Vanessa. No matter what I do, she finds a way to twist it. Michael doesn't see it, or maybe he doesn't want to. Denise popped open a container of lo mein. "Girl, let me tell you something. Some people can't stand to see you rise, especially if they thought they'd always be the star of the show. But you're finally stepping into your light. Don't let her drag you back into the shadows." Her words were comforting, but they didn't erase the ache in my chest. Because this wasn't just about rivalry, it was about family. And as much as I wanted to stand tall, I also didn't want to lose my son. A week later, Michael invited me to brunch. He chose a quiet cafe, the kind with chipped mugs and handwritten chalkboard menus. As soon as I saw his face, I knew something was wrong. "Mom," he began gently. "Vanessa feels uncomfortable. She thinks you're making her look bad, even if you don't mean to." I set down my coffee slowly. "Michael, I've done everything I can to respect her, but I can't keep shrinking myself just to make her comfortable." "I know," he said quickly, "and I love that you're finally doing something for yourself. I feel stuck in the middle. She says people are starting to compare you two, and it makes her feel judged." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Then maybe she needs to ask herself why she feels threatened by me. I'm not competing, Michael. I'm simply being myself." He rubbed his temples. "I wish you two could find common ground." I reached for his hand. "So do I. But common ground can't be built if one person insists on standing taller by pushing the other down." He didn't answer, but the sadness in his eyes told me he understood more than he was willing to admit. The gala had also brought new attention from places I hadn't expected. One afternoon, I received an email from a local magazine. They wanted to feature me in an article about Baltimore's hidden talents. My heart raced as I read the words over and over. Me? In a magazine? Denise was ecstatic when I told her. "Angela, do you realize what this means? This isn't just local chatter anymore. This is recognition. Real recognition." We scheduled the photo shoot for late February. I wore one of my own dresses, a sleek, charcoal gray piece with clean lines and subtle embroidery at the waist, standing under the bright lights, with a photographer directing me to turn my head this way, smile that way. I felt both awkward and exhilarated. When the article came out, the headline read, "Angela Carter, Stitching Strength into Style." I bought 3 copies, my hands trembling as I flipped through the glossy pages. There I was, my story laid out for anyone to read. The single mother who found her voice through a sewing machine, the woman turning humiliation into empowerment. The article spread quickly online, and my Instagram exploded again. Orders doubled. People tagged me, praised me, celebrated me. For the first time in decades, I felt unstoppable. But with every gain, Vanessa's silence grew heavier. She didn't comment on the article, didn't call, didn't acknowledge it at all. And I knew that silence wasn't absence. It was brewing. My suspicions proved right a few weeks later. Lorraine called me one evening, her voice hesitant. "Angela, I need to tell you something. Vanessa, she's been saying things. That you're letting all this attention get to your head. That maybe you're exploiting our family's name to promote yourself." My chest tightened. "Exploiting? Lorraine, I know." She cut in gently. I told her as much. "You've earned everything with your own hands, but I wanted you to hear it from me before it spreads further." I thanked her, my voice shaking. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, the magazine spread open on my lap. For all the joy I'd felt seeing myself in those glossy pages, now I felt a creeping fear. Vanessa wasn't just making sly remarks anymore. She was trying to undermine me. The next family dinner confirmed it. As we sat around the table, Vanessa finally broke her silence. "So, Angela," she said, her tone deceptively sweet, "I saw the article. Very flattering. Though I couldn't help but notice how often Michael and I were mentioned, almost as if you needed us in order to have a story." I froze. The room suddenly still. "That's not true," I said firmly. "The article was about me. My journey. My work." She tilted her head. "Yes, but without our family gatherings, without Mother's gown, would anyone have noticed you at all?" The words hit like a slap. Michael shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he could disappear. Lorraine cleared her throat sharply. "Vanessa, that's enough. Angela's talent speaks for itself." But Vanessa wasn't done. "I just think it's important to remember who opened the door in the first place." I held her gaze, my voice calm but cutting. "And I think it's important to remember that once a door is open, the person who walks through still has to stand on their own 2 feet. I've done that, and I'll keep doing it, with or without your approval." The table fell silent. Even the children seemed to sense the tension. That night, as I walked home, my heart pounded with both anger and clarity. Vanessa had drawn her line in the sand. She wasn't going to stop trying to diminish me, but I wasn't going to stop either. For too long, I had lived quietly, letting others dictate the size of my existence. But now I had proof of my talent, proof of my worth, proof that I could build something lasting. And no amount of bitterness from Vanessa could take that away. March arrived with a restless energy. The city was thawing from winter. But inside me, the fire hadn't cooled. My dresses were moving beyond word-of-mouth orders. A local boutique placed another request, and the magazine feature continued to bring in clients. My evenings were consumed with fabric, thread, and late-night sketching sessions at the kitchen table. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was building something that belonged entirely to me. Not to Michael, not to Vanessa, not to the Carter name or anyone else's. Just me. But that didn't mean the shadows disappeared. If anything, they grew darker. Vanessa's resentment had moved from sharp comments to full-blown dismissal. She no longer hid her irritation when my name came up. At family gatherings, she often turned conversations away from me, making sure the spotlight never lingered too long on my accomplishments. Michael, bless his heart, tried to bridge the gap, but I could see the strain in his face, the weight of trying to keep peace between 2 women who refused to bend. One evening, I received a call that shifted everything. It was from a regional department store in Baltimore. They had seen my work online and wanted to discuss a potential partnership, limited edition dresses under my label. I nearly dropped the phone. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with possibilities. This was no longer just about sewing from my apartment. This was the beginning of a business, a brand, a legacy. The following weekend, I told Michael and Vanessa at Sunday dinner. Lorraine and her husband were there too, as well as a few cousins. The table was full, the air warm with the smell of baked ham and sweet potatoes. "I have some news," I began, my voice trembling with excitement. "A department store reached out to me. They want to discuss carrying a line of my dresses." Gasps and congratulations erupted around the table. Lorraine clasped her hands together. "Angela, that's wonderful." Michael smiled, pride glowing in his eyes. "Mom, that's huge. I'm so proud of you." But Vanessa, she sat very still, her fork resting neatly beside her plate. Then she gave a soft laugh, shaking her head. "A department store? That's ambitious. Are you sure you're ready for something like that? It's not just sewing anymore. It's contracts, production, deadlines. It's a lot of pressure." Her words hung heavy, cutting through the celebration. I met her eyes. "I know it's a lot, but I'm ready to try." She tilted her head, her smile polite but cold. "I just hope you're not biting off more than you can chew." The room shifted uncomfortably. Lorraine cleared her throat. "Vanessa, let's not downplay this. It's an incredible opportunity." Michael added softly, "Yeah, babe. Maybe we should just be happy for her. But Vanessa's silence said more than words. After dinner, as I helped clear the table, she cornered me in the kitchen. Her voice was low, her eyes sharp. "You really think you can handle this?" she asked. I set down a stack of plates, keeping my tone steady. "Yes, I do." She leaned closer. "Angela, don't mistake a little attention for lasting success. The fashion world chews people up, and when it does, don't expect me to clean up the mess." I felt my hands tremble, but I stood tall. "I don't need you to clean up after me. I've cleaned up after myself my whole life. This is mine, and whether it lasts or not, I won't regret trying." She pulled back, her smile sharp as glass. "We'll see." That night I went home exhausted, not from the day but from the constant battle. I sat in my sewing room, staring at the crimson dress still hanging in my closet. It reminded me of where this had all started. Humiliation turned into fire, and I realized something. Vanessa's anger wasn't my burden to carry. Her bitterness didn't erase my progress. Her disapproval didn't invalidate my worth. The next week, I met with representatives from the department store. We sat in a bright conference room, my portfolio spread across the table. They admired my designs, discussed pricing, asked about timelines. It was overwhelming, but exhilarating. They weren't promising anything yet, but the fact that I was even at that table felt like a victory. After the meeting, I called Denise. "I don't know if they'll sign me," I admitted, "but even being considered, it's more than I ever dreamed." "Angela," she said, her voice brimming with pride, "you've already won. You've proven you're more than the box people tried to keep you in. That's priceless." Her words carried me through the long nights that followed. Orders piled up, deadlines loomed, and my tiny apartment was bursting with fabric, but every stitch felt purposeful. Every dress was another step away from invisibility. At the next family dinner, I noticed something different. People looked at me with a new kind of respect, asking about my work, complimenting my designs. Even some of Vanessa's cousins who had once whispered about the dress incident now praised me openly. Vanessa, of course, stayed silent, her smile tighter than ever. But as I watched Michael beam with pride, as I listened to Lorraine brag about me to her friends, I felt a deep shift inside. For so long, I had let Vanessa's opinion define my place in that family. But now, I realized her approval was irrelevant. Whether she liked it or not, I had carved my space. That night, as I walked home under the cool spring air, I thought about the road ahead. There would be more challenges, more doubts, more people like Vanessa who tried to dim my light. But I wasn't afraid anymore, because I had finally learned. My worth wasn't up for debate. By April, my apartment barely felt like mine anymore. The living room had transformed into a miniature studio. Bolts of fabric stacked against the walls, dress forms lined up in the corner, and a constant hum of the sewing machine filling the air. I barely had time to cook proper meals, surviving mostly on coffee, fruit, and whatever Denise dropped off when she stopped by to check on me. The department store deal wasn't finalized yet, but I'd been asked to prepare a small sample collection, 5 dresses that reflected my vision. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. I worked late into the night, often falling asleep at the sewing table, needle still threaded, fabric still draped over my lap. Denise called me one evening, her voice full of concern. "Angela, you've got to slow down before you burn out." I rubbed my temples, exhaustion pressing on me like a weight. "I can't, Dee. This is my chance. I can't let it slip away." "I get it," she said softly, "but don't lose yourself in the process. Remember why you started sewing in the first place. It wasn't to prove anything to anyone. It was to feel alive." Her words stuck with me. And that night, as I carefully hemmed a cobalt blue gown, I whispered to myself, "This is for me, not for her." But no matter how hard I tried to focus on the joy, Vanessa's presence lingered like a shadow. At family gatherings, she rarely spoke directly to me anymore, but her silence was its own kind of weapon. She rolled her eyes when others praised my work, changed the subject when Michael mentioned my progress, and kept her smile frozen in place whenever Lorraine defended me. One Sunday afternoon, after church, I decided to stop by Michael's house unannounced. I had baked a peach cobbler and wanted to surprise them. But when I walked in, the air was thick with tension. Michael was in the living room, his hands rubbing his forehead. Vanessa sat on the couch, arms crossed tightly. "Mom," Michael said, startled. "I didn't know you were coming. I thought I'd bring you some cobbler," I said, setting the dish on the table. "Everything okay?" Vanessa's eyes flicked toward me, sharp as glass. "Actually, Angela, we were just talking about you." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Vanessa, no," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I'm tired of dancing around it." She stood, her posture rigid. "You're turning everything into a competition. Every family dinner, every gathering. It's about your dresses, your business, your success. It feels like you're trying to outshine me in my own family." Her words hit like a blow. "Vanessa, I'm not competing with you," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "I've never been. I'm just finally doing something for myself." She let out a bitter laugh. "For yourself? Don't fool yourself, Angela. None of this would have happened if it weren't for my family. You used my mother's gala, our gatherings, even Michael as stepping stones." Michael jumped in, his voice rising. "Vanessa, that's not fair. Mom has worked for everything she's achieved." But Vanessa wasn't finished. "You love the attention, Angela. You thrive on it. And you don't care what it does to this family." My chest tightened, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. "You're wrong. I care deeply about this family. That's why I've swallowed my pride for years, stayed quiet, let myself be small, but I won't apologize for finally stepping into my light. If my joy threatens you, that's something you need to face, not me." The room went silent. Michael's face was pale, caught between us. Vanessa's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her jaw stayed clenched. I picked up my coat. "I'll leave the cobbler. Enjoy it." And with that, I walked out. The bus ride home was a blur, my reflection in the window staring back at me with weary eyes. For all my strength, all my growth, moments like this still cut deep. But somewhere inside, a voice whispered, "She can't take this from you. Not anymore." 2 weeks later, the department store invited me back. I carried my sample collection in garment bags, my hands shaking as I set them up on racks in the conference room. The buyers examined each piece carefully, touching the fabrics, nodding thoughtfully. Finally, one of them smiled. "Angela, we'd like to move forward. We want to feature your dresses as part of our summer collection." Tears filled my eyes as I nodded. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The moment I stepped outside, I called Denise, my voice breaking with emotion. "Dee, they said yes. They're going to carry my dresses." She screamed into the phone. "Angela Carter, you did it. You did it." For the first time, the dream felt real. My dresses would be in stores. People I'd never met would wear my work. My mother's words echoed in my heart. "If you know how to sew, you'll never feel powerless." When I told the family at Easter dinner, the room erupted in applause. Lorraine hugged me tightly, tears shining in her eyes. "I knew you could do it," she whispered. Michael beamed with pride. "Mom, you're incredible." But Vanessa sat quietly, her fork tracing circles on her plate. Finally, she forced a smile. "Congratulations, Angela. I hope you're ready for the pressure that comes with success." Her tone was calm, but her eyes burned. And in that moment, I realized the truth. No amount of success, no amount of humility, no amount of love would ever change how she saw me. To Vanessa, I would always be a threat, but for the first time, that realization didn't crush me. It freed me, because her approval was never mine to chase. This journey wasn't about her. It was about me. The first time I walked into the department store and saw my dresses hanging on the racks, I had to stop myself from crying right there in the middle of the floor. Carter by hand. My name. My work. My story. Customers flipped through the hangers, touching the fabrics, admiring the designs. Some even tried them on, stepping out of fitting rooms with smiles that reminded me of the feeling I'd had when I first slipped into that emerald dress, the one that started it all. It felt surreal. Denise was beside me, her phone snapping pictures as tears welled in her eyes. "Angela, you've made it. Look at this. This is just the beginning." I smiled, overwhelmed. For so long I had carried humiliation, bitterness, silence, and now here was proof that I had turned all of it into something powerful. But success didn't erase the tension with Vanessa. If anything, it made it sharper. At family gatherings, the lines between us grew bolder. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, Her words were clipped, polite to the point of cruelty. Michael noticed, of course, but he seemed exhausted, caught in a war he didn't want to fight. One Sunday afternoon, after dinner, Vanessa finally let her mask slip. We were in the kitchen, just the two of us washing dishes. The hum of conversation from the living room muffled behind us. She set down a plate, her voice low. "Do you enjoy this? Making me feel small?" I froze, dish towel in hand. "Vanessa, I've never wanted to make you feel small." She let out a bitter laugh. "You don't have to want it. That's what's happening. Every compliment you get, every mention of your dresses, it takes something from me." I turned to her, my chest aching. "I can't control how others see me. All I've ever done is try to be myself. If my light makes you feel dim, then maybe the problem isn't me." Her jaw clenched, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You've stolen everything. My mother's attention, Michael's pride, this family's respect. Do you know what it's like to always be compared to you? To never measure up?" For the first time, I saw not anger in her eyes, but fear of not being enough. My voice softened. "Vanessa, I never wanted to steal anything. I've spent my whole life invisible. And when I finally stepped into my light, it wasn't to take yours. It was to claim mine." She shook her head, grabbing another plate, her hands trembling. "Well, whether you meant to or not, you've humiliated me. Over and over." I placed the towel down, my decision firm. "I can't carry your insecurities anymore. I won't shrink myself to make you feel bigger. That's not love, and that's not respect." Her silence was answer enough. That night, I walked home with a strange calm in my chest. For years, I had let humiliation define me. But now, I understood something vital. Being humiliated is not the same as being defeated. What Vanessa had meant for shame, I had turned into strength. A month later, the store called to tell me the dresses were selling faster than expected. They wanted more. More designs, more colors, more of me. I sat at my sewing machine that night, the hum filling the room like music, and I thought of my mother. I thought of little me, sitting on a wooden stool, watching her hands guide the fabric. I thought of her words. "If you know how to sew, you'll never feel powerless." She was right. Sewing had given me power. It had given me dignity. It had given me a future I never imagined. At Michael's birthday dinner in May, I wore a new design, a golden dress that shimmered like sunlight. As I walked into the room, conversations paused, just for a beat. Compliments flowed, and I smiled, thanking each one. Vanessa sat stiffly at the table, her smile brittle, but for the first time, I didn't let her expression cut me, because I realized something. My worth was no longer tangled up in her approval. At the end of the night, Michael hugged me tightly. "Mom, I just want you to know, I'm proud of you. Not just for the dresses, for everything, for being you." Tears pricked my eyes as I held him close. "Thank you, baby. That means more than anything." As I rode the bus home, the city lights flickering past the window, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Vanessa might never accept me. She might always see me as competition, as a shadow over her carefully curated life. But that was her battle, not mine. My battle had already been fought and won. From humiliation to triumph, from invisibility to recognition, from silence to voice, I had stitched my way into a life that was finally mine, and for the first time, I knew with absolute certainty I would never shrink myself again.